Paul McDonald. Yes. Yep. Okay.
Linda's going to pass. She's going to be saying the same basic thing that I said.
Tell her we thank her.
Yes, I'm sure you do.
Do your. Before Mr. McDonald, he will be followed by, I don't know if he's in another room, but Mark Zaccaria, Roy Colum, and Greg Mancini.
Hey, good afternoon, good evening, I should say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. On behalf of the Teamsters Union and IBEW Local 99 Electricians Union, I want to express our gratitude for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Paul McDonald. I am Legislative Director for Teamsters Local 251 and the Chief Lobbyist for Local 99 Electricians Union. We applaud this legislation. We support this legislation, which will end years of duct tape approaches to our state roads and bridges. The Governor, Senate President, and Speaker have proven good things can happen when you work together. Taking care of our roads and bridges that we rely on every day is the kind of action citizens want and expect. With the passage of this legislation, we will have better bridges and better roads. Our roads will be safer, our economy stronger, and jobs more plentiful. This will be a victory for Rhode Island, businesses, government, and labor, as well as the hardworking men and women of the construction trades, and electricians and Teamsters who have supported the Governor's Roadworks plan from the beginning. We have persistently and relentlessly campaigned for this legislation. You now have the opportunity to move forward with a sustainable flow of needed revenue to avoid the damaging practices of the past. To do otherwise will return Rhode Island's roads and bridge system to a state of decline and deterioration. The long-term roads work legislation is key to protecting the motorist's safety, creating good jobs, and rebuilding Rhode Island's roads and bridges to make our state competitive. The alternative is continuing to allow needless injuries and accidents due to poor road conditions, continuing to forego the creation of thousands of good construction jobs, continuing to stand idly by while Rhode Island's competitiveness sinks to new lows due to the worst transportation infrastructure in the country. A sad, sad note. You can call it death by 1,000 potholes. I, like many of you, have had to dig into my own pocket to pay for damages caused by potholes and poor bridges. Now, some may point to political hurdles as a reason they can't support this legislation. That would be politics at its worst. The proud men and women of IBEW Local 99 and the Teamsters Local 251 and all of the building trades are ready to do our job, rebuilding Rhode Island's infrastructure. These are jobs that can put food on the table of blue-collar working families and create a road to prosperity for unemployed construction workers. It's about transforming not only their lives of these workers, but the future of our state and our economy. It's time to stop kicking the can down the road and fix the road. Teamsters Local 251, IBEW 99 would like to give special recognition to the Senate for their very fine work and efforts on this legislation. And on behalf of the Teamsters and the electricians, I urge passage of this legislation. We will be ready, we're able, we want to go to work. We're tired of 40% unemployment. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I would be glad to answer any questions you may have for me.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Hearing none, thank you. Next up will be Roy Colomb, followed by Greg Mancini, Steve Cardy, and Pat Quinlan.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Chairman DuPont. I'm the Vice President of the Building Trades, but my real job is Business Manager, Local 37 Ironworkers. It's my members that really, first and foremost, that come out there to repair the structural steel components of these bridges. And they come back constantly to the Union Hall at meetings and tell you about the condition of these bridges. We've become like accustomed to a term, emergency repairs. We have crews just started a job somewhere in Warwick, an emergency repair, where all of a sudden you get a call and you got to get welders together and guys that know how to do this and are trained. I heard questions about scare tactics, and I heard Senator DePalma talk about we're lucky it hasn't happened here in Rhode Island. It has come very close over the years. I think there's a lot of people in this room that probably remember the viaduct right by the mall, a bridge that we're replacing, when some guy early in the evening was walking his dog and looked up and saw a 14-foot crack that was open, like 5 or 6 inches or something, and that was an emergency repair that guys had to get together and round the clock to shore that bridge up, and people could have died. There was an emergency repair years ago on the Pell Bridge, where because of the wind, a section of that bridge has started to loosen up, and the engineers found it, and our guys went out in the middle of the night and worked around the clock to put that bridge back together. Very, very dangerous job. This is real. You've got to fund this, and you've got to do it now. These bridges are in horrible condition. And if anybody wants to come down to the Union Hall and talk to some of these guys, we've had a pretty constant amount of work over the last 5 years in Massachusetts. We had 50 or 60 guys, bridge company from Pawtucket, Etna Bridge. We had 50 or 60 ironworkers there for 2 years redoing the Bourne and the Sagamore bridges. I worked on those bridges 30 years ago. So that's 2 big repairs in a 30-year period. The Pell Bridge is 50 years old, I think next year or something. And we're on a phased repair now on that project, on that bridge. And that's the first one, I think. That deck's never been replaced. The Braga Bridge. I worked on the Braga Bridge years ago on a major repair. We've got 40 ironworkers on that bridge right now, a second go-around. That bridge was built in the 60s. They've already had 2 major repairs. We haven't been doing that here. I don't know why, but you can just look around at the roads. The bridges are in the same condition. You don't have to climb underneath. Look at your roads. But I appreciate everything. I appreciate the debate, the process, but it's got to get done, and it's got to get done now, believe me. And we're ready to go. We've got people out of work still. I'll entertain any questions and get out of your way.
Thank you very much, Roy. Senator Pearson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Roy, a constituent from Lincoln, so I have to ask.
Senator, I got to answer your questions.
So, Roy, as far as the building trades are concerned, if this bill were to pass and the surge were to come to fruition, can you talk a little bit about how the building trades prepares for what will be known as a very large
We've been sitting ready. We're turning away apprentice applicants every year. We're ready to just expand our classes. We've got people working at other jobs ready to come back to the trade, repair their pensions.
And how quickly can those apprentice classes be turned, and how much?
Very quickly. Very quickly. Absolutely. We do it all the time. Okay. And these jobs I referred to in Massachusetts, where they've got their ratios of apprentices there, and they fall right in, and they're trained to come back to Rhode Island or come into Rhode Island, when the work starts. But we'll keep doing that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just a quick question.
Senator Feeling?
Yeah, regarding, we're here for the director's presentation.
I was for most of it, yes.
Okay. One of the things that I keep focusing back on is this slide 8 that talks about preservation and then rehabilitation as being 2.2 times the cost of preservation, and reconstruction as being 4.3 times the cost of preservation. Is that your experience,
Yeah.
that you being out in the field, knowing that?
Absolutely. If you get out there early enough, you could, small crew could be in and out of a bridge repair job in 2 or 3 days versus weeks on some of the ones we're doing right now, and in Rhode Island, The emergency repair jobs, those are very, very expensive. That's probably the most expensive way of doing it. You're talking around-the-clock shift work. People should get paid a little more to be out of their houses at night. There's shift differential and overtime and all that. We don't need that. We just want 40 hours a week and do the job and go home and come back the next day. So,
Thank you. Senator Pagliarini?
Sir,
anyway, go ahead.
I don't believe anybody's disputing our roads need to be done, and I don't believe that anybody's disputing that your membership needs the jobs. The question at hand for me is, how do we fund that? And it might actually be quicker for your membership if it was funded out of the existing budget rather than going out to bid and doing everything else that's involved. As somebody who's representing your membership, do you feel as though this is tolls are anti-business in the sense that the steel that's going to come to these jobs is going to pay tolls, and your membership is going to be subject to these tolls?
Yes, I do, because
You feel it's
I
anti-business?
think the funding formulas or suggestions I'm hearing in other than what is presented here would affect my members more. They've been down, like most working people, because there's been, wages haven't gone up. There's not been enough work. To raise the gas tax, for instance, is going to affect them right away every time they fill their car up. Most of our guys, they have to travel distances to work. So they'd be totally victimized by a raise in the gas tax. I truly believe that. And I definitely agree with Director Alviti with the fact that these bridges are designed for the heaviest loads. Why, the cars, they'd be much cheaper to fix and much cheaper to build if they were just for cars. So I agree with I support this program very much so.
Thank you. Greg Mancini will be followed by Steve Cardy, followed by Pat Quinlan, then followed by Richard Bernardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Greg Mancini with a trade organization called Build Around. Build Around is a trade organization comprised of 3 different contractor associations. They're all building contractors. There are really no contractors that do any work on the roads. And then the other component of our coalition is the 17 trades of the union, the building trades unions. Many of those workers will be work on the roads and they work on the buildings. Our members don't want to see, I don't think anyone in the state of Rhode Island wants to see increase in any type of fee, tax, or whatever, but I think they've reluctantly realized that this has to happen, and they also realize it's more of a user fee in the sense that the people who are causing the damage are going to be responsible for paying tolls. And so, out of fairness, we support this legislation. I will say that, and Mr. Colon touched on it a little bit, the trades have had a tough ride since 2007, 2008, 40% unemployment. And, some guys have left the construction industry, but many have traveled to Boston, or at least inside the 128 corridor, and probably beyond. I know some folks actually went even to Canada. So, I can tell you that they'd like to come home. That's a tough run to go up to Boston, travel really 4 hours every day. The wages are marginally higher, but not much higher. And so I think that a lot of these men and women like to come home and work in Rhode Island if the opportunity presents itself. So I do think that they would have the, we would have the ability to have the workforce to make these projects go forward. The legislator earlier talked about, a 90-day pause for this legislation, and I would say that there's been studies out since as far back as 2008 addressing the issue. I don't see any reason to wait. I think the House waited one legislative session. They deliberated. I think that it's been studied enough, and I think that it's time to move forward with this legislation. As much as nobody ever wants to spend more money, I think that's the right thing to do, and I think it's coming about because we didn't spend the money over the past so many years that we need to spend the money. So for those reasons, we support this legislation. And if anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
Thank you, Greg. Any questions from the committee? Hearing none, thank you. Steve Cardy, followed by Pat Quinlan, followed by Richard Bernardo, followed then by Scott Wolf.
Mr. Chairman, and gentlelady and gentlemen members, my name is Stephen Cardy. I'm treasurer of Cardy Corporation. Thank you for allowing me the time to appear before the Senate Finance Committee. I'm here representing Construction Industries of Rhode Island, which is an organization of builders and suppliers of materials employing thousands of people in the building trades. You've heard about the unemployment in the construction trades, but think about this morning's headlines in the Journal. I'm 74 years old, and never in my life have I ever seen the leadership of this state, from the governor to the Senate to the House, all the senators and the House, so concerned with jobs, 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 jobs. And that's what the headline said, jobs, jobs, jobs. This infrastructure repair program is a matter of public safety, but at the same time, it's a job creator, and it provides an economic incentive for others to invest in Rhode Island. And the best example of that is 6 miles from here, Massachusetts. During the 80s and 90s, when almost every penny of road work in Massachusetts, available dollars in Mass, was being flushed down the Big Dig, there was virtually no money being spent anywhere outside of downtown Boston. And the Massachusetts economy came to a crawl outside of Boston, an absolute crawl. When Massachusetts was forced by Federal Highway Administration to spend money outside of the Big Dig to protect the investments that they already have, the Massachusetts economy started taking off. Everywhere in Massachusetts, the governor called the state bird of Massachusetts the crane. Well, it's not just Boston. It's everywhere else. We're working in Fall River, Attleboro. Bids are coming out all over the place. People are building things day after day after day. Private industry is coming in and expanding en masse because they've spent the money. I think it was a $13 billion bond issue a few years ago for transportation. They're spending the money now. They've created the jobs, and they're coming back and they're regenerating the Massachusetts economy. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Hearing none, thank you. Pat Quinlan. He's the guy.
Chairman, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Pat Quinlan. I represent the Rhode Island Consulting Engineers. This is an association of the 28 largest engineering companies that do business in Rhode Island. Their employees include engineers, land use planners, architects, landscape architects, traffic counters, anything it needs to design a road or bridge. So the first question is, why do we need this project? I heard all the testimony this afternoon. I heard all of the testimony last year. And quite frankly, I've heard this same argument in this building for the last 30 years. I was the general counsel at the Transportation Department back in the mid-'80s when we quadrupled our program by adding 5 cents a gallon on the federal tax. The problem is the Federal Highway Trust Fund is broke. They don't have the money, and it's a number of reasons. They haven't raised it. They haven't indexed it to the cost of gas. The mileage numbers on cars have risen dramatically, so the projections back in the 80s and 90s, when you put the new mileage numbers on in the electric cars, the dollars aren't coming in. And when we look at repair versus replacement, I think the director had a great set of graphics that he put up there on the cost between repair and replacement and just in lower level maintenance. It's either you pay me now or you pay me later, or maybe you could say you pay me now or you pay me a lot more later. And that just doesn't include the disruption to the transportation system. If a bridge fails, the transportation system is disrupted. I hearken you back to July of 1982. Actually, it was the first week I worked at DOT. We got a call from Connecticut in the middle of the night. The Myannis Bridge had collapsed because it had not been maintained. They didn't have a maintenance truck. DOT had to send our maintenance truck down so they could look at the damage, and there were lives lost. That corridor was closed for almost 18 months. They had to divert through the city to get around that failure. We have bridges, 1 in 5 bridges are in the same category as Myannis. Okay, I share Director Alvidi's worry that when you go to bed at night and you wake up in the morning, there's not going to be a bridge somewhere and it's going to be a headline. I agree and concur with getting Rhode Islanders back to work. As we all know, the private sector in terms of building and development within Rhode Island has really been flat for the last 5 or 6 years, maybe even longer. Our engineers and professionals who work in these jobs, these are the kind of jobs we keep saying we want to create good, well-paid opportunities for Rhode Islanders. We recruit from Rhode Island universities. We give scholarships within our group to Rhode Island universities for engineering students to hope that they will stay here. My oldest daughter is a civil engineer. She works in Vermont. She cannot find the kind of work she needs down here, so she lives in Burlington, Vermont, and works for the airport system up there. There just is not enough opportunity for young engineers. And if I don't care how we bring the money in, whether it's a gas tax or any of these other alternatives that have been discussed, at the end of the day, you need to keep a core of engineers, construction workers who know how to do this work. That's really important, and I think that's one of the better elements of this whole program. I think the legislation introduced today is much better legislation than we had last year. It's a great cost saving. I think that I commend the Governor, Senate President, Speaker of the House, as well as the Chairman of the House and Senate Finance Committee for doing this and putting the long hours in to look at all the various alternatives to come up with a better plan. I also want to assure you that we are ready in the engineering community. We have the people. We have the bodies. We can handle the work. We can schedule the work. If we wait too long, we're going to be losing these talented people to other states, which is going on right now. We're losing engineers into the Massachusetts market regularly. We had with us today the representatives of PAR Engineering, Archibald Engineering, Beta, Steer Engineering, McMahon Engineering. Some of them are still here, but I'm trying to summarize what they would also say today. And when you look at, we hear the talk of diversion. Nobody wants a semi going down your residential street. But when you look at the issue of diversion, these trucks carry 80,000 pounds. Okay, the interstates are built for 80,000 pounds. Side streets, residential areas are not built to that same standard. The cost would just be prohibitive. So if they are going to divert, just think of the common sense. A gallon of diesel is, what, about $2.35 a gallon? Okay, you get between 5 and 8 miles to a gallon. Does it really make sense to avoid a $20 toll to incur maybe 4 or 5 extra gallons, $15, $20 worth of fuel plus the time? And in the trucking business, I'm sure that Chris Maxwell and I can agree on one thing: time is money. So I don't really see that as a big issue. And I think when people try it, and I'll give you my experience in this. I'm a lawyer. I represent trucking companies. I've represented them for many, many years. When the Pawtucket and Sakonnet bridges were posted with giant signs that said $3,000 fine, there were thousands of cases. I know Judge Cruz was on the bench then. I handled probably 300 to 400 cases where these folks said, it's worth it because I don't want to go around and get lost. I would rather pay the fine, whether it be $1,500, which often they were reduced to, or $3,000. Time is money. Driver after driver after driver told me, I need to get this load here by this time. The fastest way to get it here is going over that bridge. So they're using our bridges. These trucks are 20 to 30 times the weight of a passenger vehicle. It's only common sense that they're doing damage. We can argue about how much damage and what measure. They're doing damage, and it's only a fair way to have them basically pay Rhode Island, because we're paying for those trucks paying tolls in every other state of the country. We're just not getting anything back when they come through Rhode Island. So I want to thank you all, and I appreciate your patience, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman.
Before I call up the next witness, we've had obviously folks that have come up to testify on both sides of this issue, and I think we've had a healthy discussion, and those that have testified have been very informative. The only thing that I would ask is that for those folks that are coming, to try not to belabor or try not to repeat what's already been said, just to respect everyone's time. Next witness will be Richard Bernardo, followed by Scott Wolf, followed then by John Flaherty, followed then by Lloyd Albert. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Richard Bernardo. I'm the Senior Vice President and Regional Director for CDR McGuire. CDR McGuire is a regional consulting engineering firm that has had continuous operation in Providence for the last 80 years and has had a very good, long, probably the same 80 years working with the Rhode Island Department of Transportation. I will follow your direction. I agree with with everything that Pat Quinlan said. It would be very hard to expand upon the presentation from Director Alviti. I will just make the 3 points that this is a smart plan. We can all come up with a different plan. We can all debate the impacts of trucks versus cars. Whatever plan I come up with, whatever plan another senator comes up with, there is going to be opposition. The time is now. We're talking about safety, we're talking about urgency, and we're talking about fairness. You can debate the number of cars versus trucks that it causes the damage on the roadways. As a designer, as a registered professional engineer that's been working on bridge designs for 30 years, just from the inception, you have to pay more to build a bridge because of the volume and the weight of trucks. That's a fact. Urgency. We're in this position now because we keep on debating. Debating is good. Debating got us to a better bill, but now's the time for action. I was actually, in 1983, working in Connecticut on Connecticut DOT jobs when the Mianus Bridge fell. In the House testimony, there were truckers from Connecticut talking about the bold leadership of Governor O'Neill. We have bold leadership of our governor, our Speaker of the House, and our Senate President, and our Director of Transportation to do something now before we have to do it the way they did in Connecticut. That was not bold leadership. That was a reaction. And let's hope we don't have to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Thank you. Scott Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name's Scott Wolf. I'm Executive Director of Grow Smart Rhode Island. We're a nonprofit policy research and advocacy group that is dedicated to achieving sustainable and equitable economic growth for the state of Rhode Island. And we feel that one of the best ways to do that is to strengthen our entire transportation system, one that enhances our economy and safeguards our environment, as well as providing Rhode Islanders with more healthy and affordable transportation choices. We support this proposal. We support it enthusiastically. We think it's a bold initiative. We think it's proactive and preemptive. And we think that it's critical that we approach this issue in a proactive and preemptive way because it's a matter of tremendous public safety concern, and it's a matter, we think, of tremendous economic development concern. I agree with the governor that we can't have first-class jobs if we don't have first-class infrastructure. We also think this is fair and equitable. And I'm kind of puzzled that there's been such a populist outcry against this proposal because I think in many ways it is a populist kind of initiative. It is asking those folks who impose the biggest burden on our transportation infrastructure to pay a higher share of the cost than they've been paying, in line with what most other northeastern states already impose. So this is not a radical proposal. This is not an anti-average person proposal. This is a pro-average person proposal, and it's taking 60% of the revenue for this important initiative from out-of-state sources. So This is something that's done throughout most of the northeastern states, including Massachusetts and Maryland, which have thriving economies that we would love to have in our state. The amount that's being proposed is relatively modest, even for those who are eligible, the larger trucks that are going to be paying this toll. So we are really very enthusiastic about this, very puzzled about the amount of negative reaction. I know some of it is just because of a general anti-government, mistrust of government factor, but this is important. We can't move this state forward if we don't treat this issue with a lot of urgency and with a lot of dollars up front. And so I would urge you to give this your serious consideration and your support, and we stand ready to provide any other information or analysis that might be helpful. Thank you very much.
Mr. Wolf, just want to make sure I heard you right. This is providing 60% of the funding of those particular tolls, not the entire project.
True, right,
Okay.
of the tolls, that's right. And that's an estimate. Yeah.
The word enthusiastic. Is Grow Smart Rhode Island enthusiastic that 40% of this burden will be carried by Rhode Island businesses, impacting those employees of those businesses? Is Grow Smart Rhode Island enthusiastic that this may have a deterrent from large companies moving into the state of Rhode Island because they use trucks? Explain your enthusiasm.
My enthusiasm is because if we don't do this, those businesses and other businesses are going to wither on the vine in this state, because we cannot move the state forward with the worst infrastructure, transportation infrastructure in America. We just can't move it forward at the pace we need to and want to for the sake of our kids and our grandkids.
Do you have any enthusiasm towards the Garvey funding portion of this bill?
I think it's going to produce a lower interest rate than other options, and I think with the toll revenue that's projected, it's a responsible move.
Okay. And did your board vote on this, or is this your position?
Well, this is a position that the board has authorized me to take. They haven't had a formal vote, but they have authorized me to take this position. They're aware of this position.
Did they have any consideration of making recommendations towards finding the necessary funds from the existing budget?
That has not been discussed. I'm aware of that proposal, and I share Director Alvidi's skepticism that it would provide enough funding quickly enough to do the job.
You share it, but you didn't explore it.
Didn't explore it in depth, no.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Hearing none, thank you.
Thank you.
John Flaherty will be followed by Lloyd Albert, then followed by Antone Viveros, and then by George Nee.
Good afternoon, or good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is John Flaherty, and I'm here this afternoon on behalf of the 49-member Coalition for Transportation Choices. The coalition is a very broad cross-section of Rhode Island. It includes business organizations, labor, environmental groups, public health, and we're here to enthusiastically support this bill, this proposal. We took part, me specifically, have followed transportation funding over the years, participated in the 2008 study, in the 2011 study, in the 2013 study, and we're continuing to do that. And I think that the message is that I think we've lost a sense of urgency in the state to move on this. And I don't think we can wait any longer. I like what Senator DePalma said earlier, that this is a hard thing to do, but it's the right thing to do. And I share that perspective. I would also say that I don't think we should let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We've got to move on this. We've got the worst infrastructure in the United States. We've got to move on it. That does not mean that we support just a blank check. I was very pleased to hear Director Alvidi speak earlier about the changes that DOT is instituting to make sure that the money is spent the most efficiently way possible. So we're here to support it. We think it's a fair and equitable cost, and we think it will strengthen, not weaken, Rhode Island's economy. Thank you. and I have written testimony that I'd be happy to submit for the record.
Thank you. Senator DePalma?
John, oh. Want to just go back for a second? Just a comment. Thank you. You obviously have been involved in transportation. Myself and Senator Pichardo had the Sustainable Transportation Funding Commission on the Senate side, where we looked at both things for RIPTA, DOT, et cetera, along with other folks that are here. Clearly been an advocate, and I'm going to echo a word from Senator Pagliarini. Your enthusiastic support is appreciated. Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Lloyd Albert?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and the members of the Finance Committee for hearing this testimony this afternoon. My name is Lloyd Albert of AAA Northeast. AAA appreciates the opportunity to weigh in on this transportation funding program. First, let me say that the safety of the motoring public is of paramount importance to our organization, especially in a state where nearly 23% of its bridges are classified as structurally deficient. Motorist safety is the main reason that I'm here today. What has become abundantly clear is that the funding stream currently available to repair and maintain our roads and bridges is inadequate. Legislative efforts back in 2011 and 2014 made a dent into raising more funds and dedicating more funds, yet it is evident that more is needed. AAA is hopeful today that the proposal before you leads to productive process whereby our substandard infrastructure is urgently and thoughtfully addressed. In that spirit, AAA supports immediate action on the repair, rehabilitation, or replacement of the 177 bridges in the 2015 National Bridge Inventory classified as structurally deficient. The time to act, in our estimation, is now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any Senator Pagliarini?
Mr. Albert.
Yes.
You just used the word our. Who are you speaking for? Did your board make this decision? I know that there was talk that you did a poll of a few members. I mean, I pay for 3 memberships, and I wasn't asked the question. Who are you speaking when you say our?
I'm speaking for the management of our organization.
Did they vote on this?
No.
Okay.
When I said my president and the management of our organization are supporting this commentary that I made today, which says that we need to act now on fixing our bridges. That's where I'm at.
Very good. Does AAA have a position on tolls?
Typically, and I can say for many, many years, we have been opposed to tolling on existing capacity for vehicles, for sedans. That has been a longstanding position of AAA. Money is raised for roads, they get built, and at that point they should be maintained through a process by various state DOTs. So we have not been in favor of tolling on existing capacity across the country as an organization.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Senator O'Neill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Albert, thank you for coming today and testifying.
Certainly.
We're kind of in an interesting situation here. We are speaking for AAA. I also have 3 memberships, and my family was not polled. And I'm concerned, are you speaking for the AAA membership? There are thousands of members across Rhode Island who are members of AAA. Are you speaking for the AAA membership, or are you speaking for the management team that you report to?
I am speaking for our membership when it comes to ensuring that we have safe roads and bridges on which to traverse this state. And we're in a circumstance now where we have 177 bridges that are structurally deficient. That is a huge concern to an organization that puts as much focus and importance on safety for its membership.
Yeah, I understand that part of it, but you're talking about concern for safety. We all have a concern. There's not one person in this building, or I don't think anyone in the state is not concerned about the safety of the bridges and the quality of the roads. The real issue is how do we pay for it? That's really the discussion. So it's important that I understand, are you taking a position for all AAA members, in terms of this legislation. We're talking about very specific legislation, which includes Gavi bonds funding for this project. So it's easy to say you're in favor of safe roads and safe bridges. So am I.
And that's what I'm saying. And that's what I'm saying today.
So, but is that all you're saying, or are you saying that you're representing the membership of AAA statewide in terms of this legislation that's on the table? That's why we're here. This bill.
Again, I'm going to reiterate where our position is, and it's been this way for many, many years.
Is it the membership or the management?
The management of my organization says, Lloyd, please go in and tell them that the time to act is now on a very, very important issue. The issue is before the committee. It is before both chambers of this assembly, and it's time to act on an issue that's very, very important. That's where I am.
Yeah.
That's where I'll stop.
The reason this is very important is we had the same issue come up when we had the pension issue, and we had AARP come in and testify against the pension reform, and they represented themselves as speaking for the members of AARP, when in fact they weren't. They didn't poll their membership, like I'll bet you didn't poll your membership on this legislation. So it's important that you really represent, or you say who you're representing in terms of your position on this piece of legislation. So that's what I'm trying to understand.
Understood. We have not polled our members on this current legislation. So I come this afternoon, to speak very specifically about our organization's interest in the safety of our members. And there are 430,000 of them in the state. And I can't speak for every individual person, but what I know is that we are absolutely behind the 8 ball in fixing these roads and bridges.
But you're speaking for the management of AAA.
I am.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Pagliarini?
Has AAA taken a position about increasing the gas or the diesel tax at all?
We have nationally have advocated for an increase in the national gas tax. The gas tax is 18.4 cents. The last time it was raised was in 1993. Up until the FAST Act was voted in by Congress in December, there was no possibility of getting extra funding for a long-term reauthorization. And finally, they voted in December for a 5-year reauthorization called the FAST Act. But the funding is very questionable. It comes from various funding sources that are not, in our mind, sustainable. So we have advocated for raising the gas tax. How do you take an 18.4 cent national gas tax with added costs over the past 20 years and not raise it and at some point index it for inflation? So we have supported nationally an increase in the national gas tax. Thank you. You're welcome.
Senator DePalma?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Roy, thank you very much. As a family of 6 members of the AAA, thank you for being here, and thank you for the comment. Much appreciated.
We're happy to have you.
And
Absolutely.
I paid for 4 of those, so I can, but we have 6 in the family. But all kidding aside, but thank you for being here. As a member of the Council on State Governments Eastern Region Conference on Transportation, last meeting was in August of last year down in Delaware. We talked about transportation and the like. And if we think about what Congress has done, so we thank him for the FAST Act, but if you think about all of the times the budget was continued, I think it's like 45 times. So transportation funding has been continued and continued and continued dozens of times. I might be wrong on 45, but I think I'm pretty close. And the conversation with regards to the gas tax at the federal level has required every single state to figure out how do they address the problem in their state differently. So Connecticut, I believe, has a tax, at least living there, has a petroleum-based tax, I think, on any petroleum-based, so their gas tax is higher than Rhode Island.
Much higher.
Every state does something different. Yep. Pennsylvania went through and modified theirs. Virginia did theirs differently. We need to do something. This is a way to help us get there. So as a AAA member with 6 memberships, we thank you.
Thank you. And we do understand that asking anybody to pay more to travel the roads is a tough call. And we understand that the gas tax, by its very nature, is regressive. So I can understand why the Senate President, the Speaker, and the Governor have looked at other funding mechanisms instead of that one, and I've heard that over and over again. But all we do know is that at this very critical juncture, it is time to act on these roads for the benefits of all motorists in the state, and I hope that that's done in short order. Thank you.
Senator Felag?
As a sponsor of the bill to decrease the state gas tax by 5 cents the last 5 years because of the fact that all my constituents border Massachusetts. And I see a lot of the Rhode Island cars in Massachusetts buying gas. I support your endeavor of not increasing anything to do with the gas tax.
And Senator, that's a perfect point, is that another consideration here is that you raise the gas tax by 3, 4, 5 cents. Yes, it's regressive, and it does impact lower-income people at a different rate, but it's also an issue of the border here, where there are 26.5 cents in Massachusetts, and we're at 34 cents in Rhode Island. That is a motivation to go elsewhere. Talk about hurting small businesses. That certainly does. So, bringing up that point.
Lloyd, thank you for being here. Not to belabor it, but I am also a AAA member.
Yes.
And if it's any consolation whatsoever, I am not the least bit offended that you did not pull me. As long as the truck shows up when we need a tow, that's enough for me. So, thank you.
Good. Very good.
Any other questions? Any other questions?
Yes, Senator.
Oh,
you're seconding that on that note? Should I take a poll? I can take a poll right now.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you.
Antone Viveros will then be followed by George Nee, John Simmons, and Roland LaValle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Antone Viveros, Middletown, Chairman of the Seconic Toll Opposition Platform, Concerned Island Taxpayers, and Associate Member of No Tolls Rhode Island, and a member of the Middletown Town Council. I have heard, well, I just heard that about AAA, they did, from what I understand, did take a survey of their members, and they explained the governor's position very well, and then they asked the members whether or not they would support a going out for bond or raising the gas tax. What they didn't say is, or the Republican Party group 10-year plan. That wasn't in their survey. I wonder why. I also heard that it takes a lot more to, it's more expensive to build roads and bridges to support the heavy equipment. But my understanding is, according to federal mandate, that all state roads and bridges be built to support military vehicles. I also want to say that I have been a member of the construction trade for 40 years, and I know what it is to be laid off. When I was laid off, I did whatever I had to do to keep a roof over my family's head and food in their mouth. And I didn't ask for other people to pay for it. Now, I also hear that the truckers willing to pay $3,000 fine for going over Pawtucket Bridge. I heard on the news that the governor had made a statement that the state raised $10 million on that bridge. According to Dan York, the state doesn't have a mechanism for recording exactly where the fines came from, but they figured $5 to $6 million. Also, expect to get, I think it was $16 million from the federal government. Is that a special fund for Rhode Island, a special fund for roads and bridges that we are eligible for? Because I have a letter from U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse entitled U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse 2015 Accomplishments, and in it he states that Congress passed a long-term transportation funding bill that will boost investment, and when I hear that word investment with government, I think of it as a code word for tax and spend. In Rhode Island, more than $270 million a year for the next 5 years. That's $1.35 billion. And if you figure in a 20% match, that's $1.08 billion. Spread that over 5 years, that's $216 million a year for 5 years. And we have to go out and we have to spend $3-4 million to get 300. I just don't understand it. The roads and bridges are in bad repair. I understand that, and safety first. But you know, there's as the governor of Chicago says, Ron Emanuel, never let a good crisis go by. You can always get what you can't get normally. Yes, this is a crisis, but it's a crisis because of mismanagement by the DOT in years and the way the General Assembly spends our money. The Seconic Bridge had to be replaced because it was neglected. You could go by there, by the bridge in July, and there's a pile of sand and salt on the superstructure. The bridge, the old bridge, is still standing. I understand there's a problem with turtles, that we just can't collapse the bridge. I don't understand why you can't take it down in sections. You put up the new one in sections with cranes. I hear the governor talk about cranes in the sky. Well, in December, I saw cranes in the sky, 3 of them, going to Florida. I just believe that the state has been neglectful, and now they want to take it all at once instead of a piece at a time. The Republican Policy Group 10-year plan saves us a lot of money. We could take that money and spend it on other ways. The governor's budget increases the budget. The present budget, I understand, is $8.6 billion. She's going to raise it $124.8 million, or a 3.5% increase. And yet, we can't find $60 million a year to fix our roads and bridges. I just do not understand it. UPS has said that they're going to move 10 tractor trailers and the jobs that go with it to Massachusetts if this passes. You have one of the biggest transportation companies in Rhode Island, Ocean State Job Lot. Now, I don't know if you're aware of it, but Walmart a couple of years ago built a brand new store, superstore in Fall River, and a Sam's Club, and they have a gas dispensing station, and they're closing both of them. A big building. I'm sure that Ocean State Job Lot will be able to find use for it. How can we attract businesses when we do everything we can to discourage them? I'm glad to see you reduce the fine to businesses from $500 to $450. Whether or not they make a penny doesn't count. You know, the lottery was created to pay for education. Is it paying for education? Employs a lot of people, but it's not going to education. We had a 1% increase in the sales tax to cover the bond for the banking crisis. That bond's long paid. Still have the 1%. The tolls were put onto Newport Bridge to pay for the bond to build the bridge. It's still there. Out of $18 million that they take in tolls, 6 of it goes for salaries and benefits. I think my memory serves me right. They employ 33 people, maybe. Cut grass, shuffle papers. They do good work. I got to say that I attend a lot of their board meetings. But here we have $216 million a year coming in from the feds for 5 years, and yet we have to borrow this kind of money. Talk about raising the sales tax or the gas tax. It's going to put burden, especially on the poor. I understand that. But we all know that our food and material come in by truck. How much is a gallon of milk going to go up, or a loaf of bread? It all comes back to the consumer. Our system is to elect people to come here and govern in our best interest. But, I don't blame the General Assembly. The General Assembly is in the past and present for the state that we are in, because you people do not elect yourself. The people elect you. And I just think that it's about time that the people of the state of Rhode Island takes the responsibility for what their representatives do. There's been talk about having parents be responsible for what their children do. Well, the people should be responsible for what their elected officials do. And until that changes, nothing's going to change. It's going to be the same old, same old. Some people talk about term limits. We're never going to get term limits. But our forefathers took care of that. They gave us an election every 2 years. So if the people are not satisfied, they can make the changes themselves. But if they're not willing to do it, then it's not going to happen. But I would ask that you take the $216 million a year from the federal government for the next 5 years, prioritize the bridges, doing the worst first, and look at the Republican Policy Group 10-year plan. Mr. Block put together a plan addressing the fire districts, could save over $100 million. He did the same thing for waste and fraud for the previous governor, Governor Chafee. And when they were asked, did they look at his proposals, they were told yes. Well, you give me a piece of paper, I look at it, I put it down, and you ask me if I looked at it. I say, yeah, I looked at it. Did I read it? No, but I looked at it. So I'm just asking everyone to look at the opposition, the plans, all the plans that are put before you, and weigh them with an open mind, and don't look at the letter that they have beside their name. Look at the plan. If it is the best for the state and the people of Rhode Island, go with it. If it isn't, then it isn't. But don't do this just because a lot of people want it. Like I say, there was one time I was laid off for 17 months. I did what I had to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator DePalma?
That's okay. He's finished.
Thank you. George Need?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. On behalf of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO, we wholeheartedly support this proposal. I'd like to compliment the governor, the Speaker, and the Senate President, and the Senator Ruggiero for bringing it here before the Senate. This could be one of the most critical pieces of legislation that this body has dealt with for many, many years. I think that we have to see this in the context of, we've heard a lot of testimony from our brothers and sisters from the building trade. I'm sure you'll hear more. But this is a proposal that will benefit the whole Rhode Island economy, and with that, all workers in Rhode Island. We heard earlier, Mr. Quinlan said, you can pay me now or you can pay me later. He stole my line, but I was intended on using it anyway. We have been stuck for years on later. This is our time to transition to now. This is a tremendous investment in our economy. We will get a lot of this money back. You heard from Roy Cologne from the iron workers and also other building trades whose members are working outside of the state of Rhode Island. If they come back to Rhode Island and they come back and work in Rhode Island, then Rhode Islanders will be getting the tax revenue. Those people's lives will change because they'll have more time with their families. That 3 or 4 hours in the car, it's not a good way to have a family relationship. but that revenue will come back into the state of Rhode Island. So we have to see this as a significant investment in the Rhode Island economy. The time is now. Let's get off of later and go now, and this is our opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Nee? Senator Pallerini and Senator Pearson?
Mr. Nee, again, not disagreeing with the need, not disagreeing with this being a simultaneous Jobs Works program. Talk to me about benefit. You represent the Stop and Shop trucks. They're going to have to pay the tolls and possibly increase, pass those costs on. Do you feel the last gentleman that just spoke talked about Ocean State Job Lot, and there's been talk about them doing an expansion. Do you feel as though this could have negative consequences on the economy of the state of Rhode Island because trucking companies feel as though it's picking on them, I'll say?
Absolutely not. There are tolls on trucks all up and down I-95 and the rest of the other states. We're late to the party. I would suggest that cost of tolls and other in Rhode Island, it's already been built into the product. We've probably been overcharged. So I disagree with that. The good of this far outweighs whatever would happen with some cost increases for some companies. And our members that work in those companies fully support these programs.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Pearson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. George, question kind of the same one to Roy about if this were to pass, how quickly can you begin to prepare your members? How long of a lead time is that? And what does that look like for your organization to prepare to handle this scale of work?
That question is better asked by other members of the building trades, but from the discussions that I've been a party to, those people are ready to come back to work. We have apprenticeship programs in place. We have a Building Futures program that is a pre-apprenticeship program. And listen, that's a great problem to have. And we're willing to step up to the plate and do that, and I don't think there'll be any problem at all. I think the question that Senator Felag asked of the director earlier is very, very significant as to why it has to be done this way and have this surge. If we don't do it now, we're going to put this problem as we had down the road. This is the time. That's why you have to, jumpstart it and really have it as a stimulus to the economy. So we're ready to go. You're not going to have a situation where someone says, we're not going to be able to fix that bridge because we can't find workers. We'll get them.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Nee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next up, John Simmons. He'll be then followed by Roland LaValle, Robert Quattrochi, and Stacia Heiler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Senate. I, too, I guess I'm a member of AAA as well. I want to join the crowd, so I'm a very proud member of AAA. So we've done a little bit of different tasks than what you've heard. You have before you our testimony and a report that we issued today. Give you a chance later on to read the report in detail and retest and things of that nature. But what I'd like to be able to do is just to go through a different way of looking at the tolling and bridge program than you may have heard in the past. What we looked at, as you'll see on the table of contents, is we did this very simple gap analysis, cash flow. We took what was being presented for the needs versus the revenue. We went out 17 years and we said, okay, what does it look like? And so if you'll see, if you go to this next page, we looked at this is where the annual funding need. And this, again, is from RIDOT's 10-year plan that you've heard earlier. It also is consistent with their plan or material that they have submitted to us to 2016 to 2032 on bridge and maintenance. So this is from RIDOT itself about what their needs are for the next 10 years. Not just for bridge bridge work, but all in work. And that's bike paths to road work, et cetera. This is their all-in proposal. Then we took out the remaining years to 2032 to look at and say, okay, what is the funding for the bridge, et cetera? What is the average over the 10-year period on other items? And what do you have? What is then actually the need over a 17-year period? And you have that in the chart. The next one is to look at the current transportation funding. And here we began to look, said, okay, here's what is in the 10-year plan. We had to back out some because they had the tolling program in it, $60 million, et cetera. So we backed that out. We backed out that they had a request in for RICAP funding in addition to what's already there of $20 million per year. We had to take that back out as well. And then we added in the new FAST funding as presented by RIDOT to us. We used precisely the numbers to which they generated, along with some additional funding for transit, which was in the same act. And you'll see what's the funding availability for the RIDOT plan roadworks. The next one is the annual funding gap. And here one looks at the first several years, you have a gap in funding over the expenditure. And we're not saying that we went after or looked at how RIDOT was proposing to spend its money. We took for granted whatever they provided to us was what was provided. And you'll see over the first several years there is a funding shortfall between the revenue and the analysis of revenue and spending. What we then took is that model and then looked out over 4 different ways of examining the way of meeting that funding gap. And so if you go to page 6, you'll see what we did is one with a large borrowing. Any way you look at it, to meet the needs that RIDOT has put in its 10-year plan, you need to borrow. We think minimum borrowing would be at least $330 million, $385 to $500 million to meet that short-term gap need. And if you believe in the analysis that was presented by the director and others about the logic of this, is that we spend money up today, that we all have savings out on the outer years to pay for the work that we did earlier. This is the logic of it on the borrowing, and I'll go through the chart on it. The second model was a lower borrowing with a $20 million toll. And the 2 levers that we looked at was borrowing versus the toll. And we're using tolling as a proxy for revenue, because that seems to be what is being before you is tolling. We then looked at Model 3, which is a $400 million borrowing, with a $30 million annual tolling. And again, the 20 and 30, since we did not receive the sensitivity report in the Level 2 study, we don't know what that $20 million or $30 million is as far as the tolling amount. You can do the same math as they have done, is they took a percentage down on the tolling from $60 million, or the $60 million generated at 30 and 60, they're now at 20 and 40. I would assume you'd have almost the same drop down on the rate. So if you were at 10 and 15, you're along those lines on a $20 million or a $30 million borrowing. So the daily amount would be substantially less. It would at least be a third if you went to the $20 million one, a little bit higher if you went to the $30 million one. And again, one of the things we want to say is that the Model 1, 2, and 3 meets the requirements for the entire 17-year period, and provides the match that we've been told for the transit application. Also, it provides, as we see it from this period of time, all of the funding is necessary, and there is an excess of unallocated funding after you get to year 10, 11, and 12. So if I may go to the verse chart, and this is our $515 million borrowing. And what we're saying is, here's what was been spent in the past, here's what it looks like for the surge, and then here's what the long-term impact looks like after the 10-year period. And here we find that this will provide on an annual basis the cash flow necessary. It would cost in a local sense of about 200 and some odd million, maybe $300 million in interest over the time period in the way we've structured the borrowing. I'll do say that we structured the borrowing a little bit different than what you've heard from the Director El-Eidi, saying we're going to borrow $300 million in next year. We believe that's not the most sensible borrowing. We believe that you should be doing other types of borrowing, like notes in anticipation, borrow for only the cash that you need when you need it, as opposed to an upfront borrowing, which fixes in a longer-term rate or higher rate. So our borrowing methodology is a little bit different. There's backups to it if anybody is interested in the borrowing piece. But if one looks at the year 2025, we come to a $1.6 million unused amount. So we fully meet the 10-year requirement all in with the borrowing for what RIDOT is asking for. The next several years, you can see, with the borrowing being paid off, there is still excess unallocated after we've taken the amount away for debt service, for instance. That top part of the chart is net of debt service. So there's a fairly substantial amount of money over the next several years on this model. The next model is the borrowing with a tolling. And here, most interesting, when we did the model, the tolling does not affect the first 10 years in any substantial way. Because of the debt, the way they've structured debt and the way the tolling comes in, the excess for the $20 million at the end of 25, as we see it, is around $35 million. We think it can be a little bit more than that if you do a different type of borrowing. But again, we only used what was presented to us by RIDOT. And so if you look at it over the year, you can see the next 7 years, there's a spike of a fairly large amount. Then it levels off, and then it spikes out again. So we don't know. There will be a continuance after 2032, 33 of a fairly substantial amount of money. The excess for this, if you look at the end, is $299 million, about $300 million unallocated at the end of the program. The next one is we raised the tolling to 20 to 30 million, and we borrowed $400 million. When one looks at this model, the $400 million meets the requirement for matching if they go after the transit. It does match the 10-year period. It does provide excess over time, and the excess over time is around $485 million. So if you go from 10, if you go from just purely borrowing, a $20 million, $30 million, you can see where you have a fair amount to meet the needs current and for out years. We then ran what we refer to as the RIDOT proposal. And again, this is our understanding of what the proposal is. Since we haven't seen the sensitivity report, we don't know what the $20 or $40 would generate in the state. And we looked at this in a sense, and what we found with the borrowing of $300, it doesn't allow the match if an actuality to go for the federal transit money. They'll have to come up with another presentation of how you get $400 million of assured funding. This only gives you $300 million. Second, it doesn't fund on an annual cash basis for the year 20, 21, and 22. The actual cash needs that they're looking to do the work. So either they have to provide additional funding or change the way they're doing the work. And so we didn't really go after that. We said that that's something if that's what they want to do. However, when one looks at this model, if you, in fact, you move spending, then you move it in all of the models. If you move the spending to meet the cash flow, then that also affects any of the models that we have. And so this model, again, if you look at it, it's a $701 million excess unallocated amount at the end of this model to 2032 with a $45 million tolling amount. Summary, one looks back at this, the next page, 11, one looks at the total cost. If you look at the borrowing or the $300 million program with the $45 million, the total local cost. And here again, looking at the report, the level 2 that was published, they're indicating 40% of the trucks that are eligible to be tolled have local registration. So we know for sure that 40% will have the toll applied to them directly. We also know that that 40% is not all-inclusive because the REMI report earlier said it was about 20+% that were actually local deliveries. And so we don't know for sure what the local delivery piece of that. So but we're only using the 40%, which we understand is in the work from RIDOT. That costs us locally about $531 million. The total borrowing is only $282. With the $435 million borrowing and $20 million tolling, it's $368 and $409 for the last model. And this is the actual local cost using the 40%. One looks next at the benefits arrived for this 3 or the 4 programs. Again, with the $45 million program, there's about $701 million that we believe is unallocated or unprogrammed. The first model, the borrowing, is about $245, and then you can read the next. And again, this is based upon RIDOT's year, its own plan, especially on bridges. If we're looking at, if we started the conversation months ago, was about bridges. This fully funds what RIDOT talks about for bridges between 2016 and 2032. If I can go to the cost and benefits of a larger borrowing here, and this is why we feel that this is a policy choice on behalf of the Finance Committee of the Senate and the House as well. There are some positives about borrowing. Again, borrowing is at least cost-effective to the state. It does provide the additional funding for the 610 as they've programmed it. It provides the borrowing amount necessarily to do the match, et cetera. and that, again, it eliminates or reduces the amount of additional revenue, i.e. tolling. There are risks, again, with the borrowing. You've faced a large borrowing. You're at the risk, for instance, of the federal funds in the future, gas tax income, et cetera, on the adjustment of the borrowing. So there is some risk in it. However, when one looks at the large borrowing, the original presentation was $600 million of borrowing, it'd be 300, and this one we think it's going to be 385. So the variance, we all agree that we're going to use the future federal funds to pay for the Garvey. Now it's a matter of size and how much do you want to be dependent upon it. So that's then on the tolling program. Here again, there is some benefits, as you've heard, about the exterior use of our roads by people without Rhode Island plates on it. And it is a fact that there are a number of folks who drive through Rhode Island, and there is some ability to pull their funding in on the tolling, et cetera. But again, it's about 60% as we understand it directly. We think it's a little lower than that does it. However, it does not take into consideration the impact of local deliveries, and we think that that brings the local impact much higher. When one looks at the tolling program that is being presented to you, it is worse than the original tolling program. Reason being is you're talking about 40% of the $45 million on tolling. Right? There is no benefits, there's no exemptions, there's no credits in this program. So the full amount of 40% will go after the industrial sectors of Rhode Island who will be impacted by the tolling. And we've all heard that there is no impact or magical impact on tolling. One has to look no more than the REMI report that was addressed by the governor's office to require it. When one looks at the REMI report, not just the job creation, which is the majority of it, is actually the 610 transit, which is probably in excess of a couple thousand jobs if, in fact, we get the transit funding. But one looks at the negative side of the tolling, this we believe will be worse. In the REMI report, there are over 1,000 job years lost with the tolling program on manufacturing and warehousing. Just the two incidences that right now the governor has before you in a Brookings report saying the 2 of the 7 areas that we should focus in on, this program, this tolling program puts at least $45 million against that 2 sectors. We believe, according to the REMI report, it's over 1,000 jobs. Overall, the tolling program cost around over 2,000 job years. And so we believe the tolling program is an extraordinarily negative impact to the state. We have also agreed, in the sense if one goes forward with this, there are a variety of recommendations on moving forward that you can read. We believe that if you're going to have this program, RIDOT ought to be able to come back with a plan of where they're going to put the tolling locations, because we looked at the tolling locations, for instance, in some of the ones that have been advertised, and they're actually on bridges that are fair. They're not necessarily ready for the renovation, so we're not sure the tolling locations can be done. We know that they're flexible by RIDOT. So the tolling locations, how much each will generate, what is the level 2 sensitivity analysis, et cetera. In the long and short, however, Mr. Chairman, in closing, we would like to actually commend the governor, the Senate President, and the Speaker for their bringing this to you today and actually having a conversation. There is no doubt we need to have an answer. We need to fix the bridge. This is not about questioning whether the bridge work is necessary or done. We do, however, have some caveats on the work. The deterioration model, we did not separately validate. Some of the cost estimates, the timing, for instance, for 610, we have a little harder time believing that 610 on a fiscal 2017, which starts in several months, will have the ability to get into play and fully done. But again, what we did is we accepted it all as it's presented to us. But we do feel that you need to come to some resolution. The sooner the better, so we can begin to get our bridges and the rest fixed and repaired. And with that, Mr. Chairman, you have a copy of the full report, and I would be more than, willing, I want to say, to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Senator Felag, and then Senator Palmer, and then...
I'm a little confused here, but then again, we just got this report, and we're looking at it, and it looks to me like you're saying that there is a set amount that we need to invest in our infrastructure. And I guess that's your premise to start off with.
basic premise is we've accepted in 100% the RIDOT 10-year spending plan for all in. That's the roads, bridges, et cetera. That's the file tip.
Okay.
We then took the next piece for the next 7 years, and we've received from RIDOT what they project to spend on bridge repair, operations, and maintenance. What we didn't have from RIDOT was road work, et cetera, and some of the others. And what we did was we took the 10-year average, and that's what we put into the outer year projections. We're talking about 2026, 2027. We feel that's a reasonable starting point for discussion, but then we also indicated what's the total revenue that would be generated. And that total revenue generates more than what that plan that we've outlined for the future year expenditures require.
Okay,
so there's excess.
So getting back to my question, if I look at Model 1, that says no tolls.
That's correct.
You're saying that we should borrow $515 million.
I'm saying what we did is we did a cash flow analysis, and $515 million would provide a positive amount for the 10-year period that we have for the Transportation Improvement Plan and cover what we believe would be the next 7 years. Also, there would be additional funding of, say, over $200 million.
So to me, that means that if you're borrowing more money, to me, it always means you're paying more in interest.
That's correct.
So if I'm borrowing the 515, then I'm paying a big interest amount on that. And you're saying over this 15-year period, I'm only going to have $245 million as a surplus.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Now,
again,
if I go to the current, if I go to the current proposal,
one of the charts we did provide you is the total interest to be paid. It actually goes to 2036, and so we didn't go to ended at 2032. We went to 2036. The full interest cost is in the report. If you look at page 11, that is the total interest cost of the tolling just purely the borrowing over the life of the debt.
right. So now I go to the current proposal before us. We're borrowing $300 million, and we're under the assumption that we're going to get $45 million in tolling annually. Correct?
Right.
So I'm borrowing less money, which means I'm paying less interest. But at the end of that, I have $700 million as my surplus.
Yes. But
So
you
to
go to that
me,
page.
the goal here then is to try to borrow as least amount of money as we can, right? Because if I'm borrowing $500 million and I'm not getting any other revenue source, then I'm going to be paying a lot of money for that borrowing without having a revenue
On a
source.
pure borrowing, what we believe if you do a pure borrowing, you have about $282 million versus the 700, or I'd say it's about, yes, about 200 million. I'm sorry, next page would be, it's $245 million would be excess if you just did the borrowing.
Right.
Versus $700 million if you do it with the borrowing and the tolling.
Let me rephrase it, I guess. I guess the question is, we all agree that we have a set cost.
Yes.
And now how do we pay for that set cost? Do we pay for it strictly by borrowing, which you showed here, which to me is a no-go to begin with, just from the perspective of if I'm going to borrow $515 million, it's going to cost me a lot of interest, and at the end of the day, I'm only going to have a surplus of $245 million. So now I go to the current proposal, which in each of your models is the borrowing of the least amount of money. So that becomes the most palatable for me in terms of borrowing because I'm not paying a lot of money on the interest. So now the question becomes, is tolls, and that's the central crux of the issue, is tolling the answer in terms of garnering that money or not? Or is there another source to replace that? And some people have brought up the sales tax, some people brought up the gas tax, some people brought up, maybe even borrowing, which is not a good alternative. But to me, the tolling looks like in some ways charging the out-of-stater, rather than the Rhode Island resident. And how do I?
Yeah, there are deficiencies in all of the other revenues. If you look at the gas tax of $4.5 million or 4.3, the competitive nature, it's more paid locally as opposed to outside. The diesel is a little different because the mix of payers of diesel is out of state and in state. It's done by mileage driven in Rhode Island. So that's it. If you do licensing for the vehicles that are impacting, yes. We believe that you're looking at tolling is the secondary rational approach to take if you're going to do tolling. Our issue with tolling is you're only doing the tolling, and I know this is heresy, but if you look at the Tax Foundation's recommendation on tolling is you have the broadest base and the lowest rate. So that means you do all tolling. If you look at the bridge that goes over Newport, it's $18 million on that tolling structure. So if one looks at the broader base of it, what you've chosen is to look at what is perceived to be the vehicles that damage the roads the most. And we have a little bit of a different opinion of that. If you look at the study, we think we went back and looked at it. It was the impact of vehicles on the roads as opposed to the impact on roads. So the largest impact of vehicles is the larger trucks. So one looks at the impact of it. We believe that the larger trucks are more damaging, yes, so we all understand that. That's probably a better place to go. You can go with it on a stepped-up rate as it is over the Newport Bridge, higher fee, lower for cars, more for the other. We're not calling for tolling on all of it. We would believe that, and that's why we're not recommending a final approach, Senator. But I do want to go back to answer what I think you were asking. If you look at 11 and 12, 11 and 12 says if you do the $45 million borrowing, that local cost is $531 million. The local cost on the other, from our perspective, is $280 million, if you look just at the borrowing. So for that difference, you're getting about $400 or $500. You're going from $700 million net benefit, we believe, to $245. Is that enough for you to say it's worth it, especially when you get the savings? Our question is, when you get the savings, it's out in the years 15, 16, 17, and 18 from today. So the question is, that's where we have some difficulty about when one says it, for the 10-year period, all of the programs come close about what the additional benefit is, what's left. One is 1.6 million, the other one was about $50 million. So believe if you're going to go look at the tolling, then one looks at the tolling for the least amount. And I would differ with you on the borrowing, because you do have to do the borrowing. Unless you raise the amount of money dramatically within some other source of revenue, or you provide RICAP funding, or you provide some other funding, you need to do the borrowing to meet the surge.
Correct.
There is no doubt.
Correct.
Okay. So you need
the question is how much money do you need to borrow to satisfy that surge? And to me, if you borrowed all the money, then you'd have an overabundance of money, and it wouldn't work in terms of the surge, because you'd be paying overall $100 million more in interest on the aspect of where another funding source, whether it be tolls or not, provides a steady stream of money coming in over that period, so it more flows with the overall expenditure on a yearly basis. Let me put it that way.
That the local folks are going to pay $342 million in tolling. So you have $100 million more in interest, but you have a $340 million increased cost on tolling for local people.
But as far as your numbers are concerned, you're going to have $700 million more dollars to work with,
yes,
as a surplus.
Oh, yes, there is no doubt. When you pull that model out to its end, there is funding out there that we think is unallocated that you can use for us. The question is, how much do you want?
As a layperson, a mathematician, or someone just looking at it, I would like to have that money available to me, because in the future, I'm looking at it, well, DOT won't have to go off to borrow, or the state won't have to go borrow, because there'll be money there as a surplus.
And you have a surplus under just a pure borrowing as well. It depends on how much you want to borrow and how much you want to do additional revenues. We just believe that one has to look at that. The two levers, as I said earlier, is borrowing and the tolling amount, or revenue amount. We believe if you look at the tolling or borrowing amount, you have enough to do the 17, 18 years of funding with excess funding at the end of it. The more tolling you do, the more you do cost folks, but more at the end. And so that's the policy choice, and that's where for us, it's harder for me to say what's the right policy choice in the sense of a small amount of tolling for 20 million or 30 million. Once you pass into the tolling, then how much is it? And we looked at the 20 and 30 for sensitivity, and then we looked at how much do you really want to accumulate or have unallocated 16,
right, so
15,
you really
16 years
never
from now.
fixated on this extra 45 million that we say we need over this period, and what is the best option, so to speak, in garnering that funds, whether it be tolls, whether it be gas tax, whether it be increase in sales tax, whether it be imposing some other kind of tax.
Anytime you're looking for additional funding, there's not a good answer. If it was, we would not be here.
Right. Thank you.
I'm a simple person from District 11. Why do we need a surplus? If I hear the word surplus, we're charging somebody too much money. Either we're borrowing too much or the tolls are too high as proposed.
We would say it's unallocated, and that's a better term for our purposes, because you would right. If it's a surplus, then why are you having it? But in some sense, there is a rationale for it. I will make their argument for you. If you look at the amount of gas tax that we're generating today, if you go back a number of years ago, a penny was much higher than the 4.3 you have today. What's it going to look like in 10, 12, 13 years from now? How precise can we be? And I don't do disrespect to the director and others, the perfection of RIDOT to be able to spend $762 million precisely over a period of time, we're not comfortable that that's going to occur. It'll be higher or lower. So you need the flexibility out over time to say, okay, if we move or miss something or something costs more money, you need that excess cushion to be protective of the infrastructure improvements. So my successor doesn't have to come back in and say, you should have done something different.
Would RIPAC take the position, based on this very detailed report, that Senator Raptakis's bill of a 90-day study makes sense?
No, I think you've got to move on and act upon this. I think this has been debated back to the 2008 and 2009 blue ribbon on traffic. You know all of the alternative revenue sources one could pick. It's a policy choice of which ones. We believe you should look at the borrowing. I'm a little different than I think on Senator Felag when looks at the borrowing. I think the better the borrowing on it, and this is an anti-RIPAC position usually. We don't like borrowing. But on this case, since you need to do it, I think a borrowing amount, and then you look at a revenue source that is going to be protected of the infrastructure that you're trying to construct over time.
Thank you.
And whether it's tolling or you put on the sales tax, or gas tax or something else, I guess I don't want to go to Connecticut and look at the Connecticut sources where they have $100 billion and they've got every source of revenue being used to do this. I think we have a golden opportunity sooner than later to get it started.
Thank you. Senator O'Neill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, John, for your testimony. Looking at the no tolling with a $515 million bond, when I look at this work, I think of like a construction loan. You're going to build a house, $500,000 house. The bank isn't going to give you the whole $500,000 when you start digging the hole for the foundation. They're going to give you a little bit of money as you need it, and as you go along, you put the foundation in, you frame it, and so on. Well, this is a big construction project here. It's not all going to be done in a week or a month. So I would think that I know the interest rate is applied when the money's taken from the bank or from whatever source of funding. Was that considered in the option Model 1, the $515 million?
Yes, the 515 is actually a staggered borrowing when you need the cash.
Okay.
We actually, when it's almost 5 or 6 years of borrowing short term, we believe that that's a better approach is to do short-term borrowing. There are notes that you can do in anticipation of the bonds, the typical financing feature. So if you do on a short-term borrowing, and then you roll them up when you need it, and you go permanent at a later date. That's just a cash management. We think it's more expensive just to go out in 3 months from now and borrow $300 or $400 million, because then you have a fixed rate, and normally a bond pricing is going to be higher price than note pricing. So that's one approach that we look at. There will be financial advisors that say that doesn't make a lot of sense, it's not good. That was our model. We think it works better if you borrow only what you need as opposed to having the money in a fund because the arbitrage requirements, you can't make money on the borrowed money, so it's costing money to borrow it. So we don't believe you should have a cost on the borrowing until you actually need the borrowing.
Yeah, and of course,
But those models, Senators, that's not what the RIDOT proposal is. It is to go out and borrow the money and then pay it back over 15. We pay it back over a little longer period of time with the notes up front, and then actually it's a 15-year permanent takeout.
So you do present some proposals that I don't think we were familiar with in detail, so thank you very much. It's a very interesting scenario. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
In the full report, you'll see we actually provide you all of the revenue sources, all the spending, the debt, the borrowings, et cetera, in the beginning of the interest payment. So you have all of it in the report.
Thank you.
But again, I shorted the notice, I apologize, but we only got the bill on Thursday, so our analysis from Thursday until today was relatively quick. So I do thank the two folks over there who spent the weekend running models. We do appreciate RIDOT's help with us as well. It's been a very pleasant task over the last several months meeting with them, and we thank them for that. Yes. So, yes, Mr.
Thank you. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, thank you very much. In fact, I read your letter, unfortunately, during lunch today. I'm surprised you got this done this quick, just having it out, the bill last week. So obviously, quick turn on that. So thank you for doing it. If I can go back to page 11 for a second. I just have a basic question or comment on 11. The first sub bullet. In the primary focus where it talks about will be borne by local entities.
I'm sorry?
The first sub bullet. And it talks about will be borne by local entities.
Yeah, I'm getting old and hard of hearing, especially when there are hard questions. I have a hard time.
So page 11. I'll let you get to page 11 first. The first sub-bullet, total cost is calculated assuming that a minimum of 40% of the tolling cost will be borne by local entities.
Yes.
Okay. So the premise would be that the tolling approach is a bad approach. I'll start at that. The tolling approach is a bad approach from the perspective of its negative impact on local entities. Yes. Okay. Pick any of the other ones. I don't care any Model 1, RIPEC Model 1, Model 2, or Model 3. Every person every taxpayer in the state of Rhode Island ultimately pays for that. Mm-hmm. So when we talk, I appreciate this is a financial analysis. Mm-hmm. It ties a little bit to a business impact. But if we just borrow, everybody in the state of Rhode Island pays whether you have a car or not, whether you use the roads or not. You do. If we're paying,
the repayment, Senator, the repayment is actually from the New Garvey borrowings, and the difference is from what this proposal would be is you have, we think $385 million that you're going to have to borrow to meet the cash flow needs under the.
So the interest. All I'm saying is the interest rate.
Pardon?
The interest on the borrowing the money.
Right.
Interest on the borrowing money is how much? Pick one of the scenarios.
On the interest?
Yeah.
The interest is as stated here.
Right. Pick one. How much? Just give me a number.
$89 million for the $300 million borrowing, and it's $282 over the time for the $500 million.
Okay. So if we went to
$260 and $180, so
if we went to $500 million,
right,
it would be about over $275 million to. Yeah. You said 280.
Yes. It's
$282 for
$282 million that goes to 2036. That's the full interest payment that we're paying on the borrowing.
Who's paying the borrowing? Who's paying the interest?
That is coming from the Garvey FAST Act funding and the Garvey funding. The same payer who is paying the refinancing of the $120 million on the Garvey.
So, but it's ultimately all taxpayers. I'm getting back to it. It's all taxpayers paying that.
One would argue the federal funding that comes in is what's paying for it.
Which is all taxpayers. At the end of the day, it's not just from a user. We can't split hairs.
I can't split hairs because it's, as indicated by the Senator Reed, it's 3-to-1. On the gas tax, we get $3 back for every $1 we put. So
I'm good.
If you believe it, I understand what you're saying. All taxpayers pay it. Rhode Islanders paying part of it.
We all pay on the gas tax. We all pay.
Right.
From a user fee perspective, which is what this is looking at. We're looking at just numbers here. We have to look at the policy behind it. Mm-hmm. We can look at things as just numbers and say, I can write an equation for anything. From a numerical analysis perspective, you give me a set of numbers, I could do a regression on it, I can give you the equation that creates that. Mm-hmm. it's meaningless. If I want to look at what the policy is that drives that equation, that's going to change the equation on what I give you as an output in the end. The impact on all Rhode Islanders from the perspective of I drive a car, so we can disagree whether it's 9,000 times or 1,000 times. Pick your number. From a gas tax perspective today, if I drive a car that gets 21 miles to the gallon or 20 miles to the gallon and a tractor trailer gets 5 miles to the gallon, they're paying 4 times more than me. I'll just make it simple there. But if they're doing 1,000 times more damage or 9,000 times more damage, that's not fair and that's not equitable. So we can't just look at this from a numbers perspective. There's the policy piece that has to come with this as well. So when it comes back to who pays for this, from a pure borrowing perspective, all Rhode Islanders, all Americans are paying for it, not just the folk. If you want to just figure out how you want to spread it out, everybody pays for it as opposed to those who are doing the biggest impact to it, the biggest users of the resource. Right? I mean, great job with the numbers, but we have to also factor in the policy side as well.
I want to go back and say that assumes that somehow the interest payment that's being paid on the borrowing comes from only Rhode Islanders. What we're saying is the proposal of the toll, according to the Level 2 study, at least 40% are registered vehicles within Rhode Island. So at least 40% of an additional revenue, tolling, is going to be paid by local businesses. Okay?
Agree.
Purely.
Agree.
As opposed to no, if you go just borrowing, that does not happen.
Agree. I don't disagree with you, but I think we're somewhat, I don't want to say irresponsible, but we need to articulate that in a no-toll situation, when we're just borrowing, everybody pays for it. Because the money's got to come from somewhere. There's no free money out there. It's coming from somewhere, so we all pay for it. As opposed to those that are using the service paying. If I'm using the service more, I'm paying more as opposed to, and I realize toll, it's a 60-40 split categorically, but we need to make a statement that if it's borrowing only, we all pay. There's no free lunch out there.
Yeah, I think we have different semantics on it because, again, I would go back to the REMI study as well.
I have.
And you go back and read the REMI report. If you look at it, it's all positive on funding. When you get to the tolling, it's negative. So if you take the negative out, and that's the tolling, then any of the external funding that comes in, the additional FAST Act money, et cetera, is from the outside. Yes, some Rhode Islanders pay in it. According to Senator Reed, we heard it's 3 to 1. Every $3 that we get, we only give $1 on the gas tax. We've heard so.
Understand.
The proportionate share of this is being paid by more outside of Rhode Island than if you toll, because the tolling comes at least 40% and more will come from local businesses. Our concern is not as necessarily of the driver of the truck, for instance, in some sense. It is what happens when it comes down to the incident of the toll. The toll is not necessarily always going to be paid by the driver. They may have less profit, but ultimately it's going to be passed on to someone. The REMI report says, and this is what we went back to, it applies to manufacturing and applies to warehousing. And they lose, over this period of time, according to the report that we're relying upon, over 1,000 job years are lost because of the tolling. You take the tolling away, is what the borrowing does, you have no negative. That's all we're saying is as policy choices, Senator. They're not numbers. They're just the policy choices of where you drive it. And so if you're going to go to tolling, you have to understand that tolling does have an impact. It has a negative impact upon the economy of Rhode Island.
I think we'll disagree to disagree. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. Just Senator De Palma, when we get the director back, I'm going to ask him another question because we're focusing on the 40%, the 60%, and who's doing damage with the vehicles. But I want to know what percentage of the damage is caused by that, because I'm going to make the statement that I believe, and when you read the 1979 report, that weather and lack of maintenance create bigger issues than the weight of the vehicle. So, Mr. Simmons, one last question. Has RIPAC done a study? We're talking here about alternatives. Has RIPAC done a study on what would happen if we reduced our gas tax? If we reduced our gas tax, would we bring in more revenue than if we didn't reduce our gas tax?
I guess it would be the question if you reduce the gas tax and what are you reducing on the other side? You're reducing, again, any economic model has two sides of it. One side of it is I take away money that people don't have to pay and generate. And therefore, there's an impact of that people then have disposable money they can pay, and there's an impact to it. Where do you get it from? Is it from work that's being done in Rhode Island? That may have more of a negative impact than the small amount of impact because of lesser tax, because of savings. Savings strips some of the money out that comes in. If I drop the tax by $4 or $5 million and we say, okay, where is that going? What are people going to do with it? They may spend it. It may hit a taxable issue for us. It may not. So as long as we have not done that type of analysis.
My question would be specifically, I live on a border community. I can go to Westport, I can go to Fall River and buy my gas probably 3 to 8 cents a gallon less. If the state of Rhode Island reduced their gas tax, would the volume offset the loss of revenue?
I think you'd have to drop the tax down a little bit more. One does a comparison shopping between here and Massachusetts. We're 10 to 11 cents higher on a lot of the locations. So you would have to drop it down fairly substantial to stop the cross-border activity. And I'm not sure it would have as much impact here on the cross-border because we have 70 to 80% of all of our population lives within 10 to 15 minutes from Massachusetts. And a large portion of it drives through Massachusetts to come here to work and to do other things. So we have not specifically looked at it, but I would say to you that you would have to drop a fair amount to be very competitive. And at 10 or 11 cents at 4.3 million, you would have to find a fairly decent source to replenish it. On the diesel, on the other side of it is the diesel is done by mileage driven, not by the price. So the diesel has a much more of a life to it because it is spread out over the nation as opposed to just Rhode Island. But that, again, 1 cent only equals about 800,000, so you'd have to do a fair amount to make amends.
While they're talking, I was thinking of the Connecticut border where everybody's coming from Connecticut into Rhode Island. They gas up in Massachusetts. They would gas up in Rhode Island if it was attractive enough to pick up some substantial volume. Higher volume, more revenue, but at a lower percentage.
Yeah, and I don't know what the crossover point is when it becomes more than competitive and people would actually choose to come here to buy gas.
Well, they'd be driving up 95 anyway.
Yeah, and it would stop, yes. But again, it's not just the tax. There is an underlying commodity price difference between us in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Mr. Chairman, unless there's... I thank you for your patience and indulgence.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ali. Then we're going to have Robert Quattrochi and Stacia Heiler. Roland LaValle.